You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 191 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dale here with Pankaj Bhojwani as always. This week on the pod, we've got a frosty cold calling coming up this weekend in Chicago with the Living Legend format, front and center. An interesting format, I would say, Pankaj, and one that we're going to dive a little bit into in the main topic this week.
Yeah, really looking forward to that. I think two of us are aligned a little bit on what we think the meta is going to be, or should be rather. But before we get into that, let's get into the This Week in Flesh and Blood. Hayden, what did you get up to?
I was just saying to you before literally about 30 seconds ago, before I hit record on hit the record button, I did check out a bit of coverage from the weekend from the calling in KL. And I played a couple of games this week of Living Legend ahead of the pod this week. But again, my Flesh and Blood has been pretty light. I was just saying to you, I'm about to catch a flight in about 3 or 4 hours down to Melbourne, which is another city here in Australia, for what is effectively like a gym/fitness competition. I say competition, it's more for fun, really, honestly, which I'm pretty excited about. I've done one before. They're called like High Rocks events. They're kind of like a mix of running and functional workouts, which is quite cool. I had fun last time, so doing another one, but really it's just an excuse for a nice weekend away with friends. So yeah, that's kind of been my week. It's so close now to the end of the year. I just feel like it's in touching distance as well. How about you?
Well, all the best for the competition, or
Thank you.
semi-competition.
Yeah.
For my week, I stayed up till about like 2 a.m. my time to catch the calling, to catch the finals of it. And that was really, really fun. I want to shout out Esmond Hing for doing the production. He was doing the production side of Calling KL. We also worked together in Calling Phuket, and I think he did a fantastic, fantastic job this past weekend. Aside from that, been trying to prepare for casting the Living Legend Calling this weekend. Unfortunately, most of the people in my testing group aren't going. So I've sort of resorted to just tuning into random Tarsha games, just like spectating random Tarsha LL games to try and understand what's going on, and just like chatting with people and stuff.
We should have played some games. Why did I not think about this? Next time, let's make sure that we ourselves, me and you, we can play some games in preparation for that.
Now that you brought that up, we've never played, have we?
No,
we've never played. Okay, yeah, we should do that. Yeah.
I think, what we should definitely do is next event we're both at, we should play a game in person as well. Maybe we'll even record it. Maybe we can have write-ins for the game that people want to see played. Does it need to be a classic Icelander versus Brute map? Please, no.
I'll play Icelander Dromai with you. Icelander Dromai, I'll play that one.
Oh, I like that matchup, actually.
That matchup was so fun.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, that's the only reason I didn't hate that format, is because the two decks that were probably somewhat not as enjoyable to play into, the matchup between them was actually very enjoyable. So yeah, I'm not opposed to it.
Question there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the calling, you're saying you're preparing for Chicago. If I pass on into the news, I want to start with this recap of Kuala Lumpur calling, and shout out to my good buddy Nick Butcher taking down the calling. Nick is someone who honestly puts in so much time and preparation for these events, and when he can, right? He's also a full-time student and things like this. I think it came at a good time of year for him, but he called his shot. He messaged us in the group chat. He sent us his deck list on Friday, and he's like, I'm ready to. He actually said, I'm ready to top. He called that he was going to top the event, ultimately going on to win. And Nick came really close to playing Zen for Worlds. Actually, he spent a lot of time on Zen prior to the World Championships, and ultimately found that because of Dash.io, moved on to Enigma for Worlds, and off of Zen, made top 4 at the teams, captained, not captain, took his team alongside the captain to the top 4 at the Team World Cup as well. So yeah, but ultimately picking back up Zen and taking down Kuala Lumpur. So congrats to Nick.
Yeah, definitely massive shout out to him. Yet another calling win for him, taking down Anzen. I was so close. I was watching the finals, was putting time against Nick Butcher, and my prediction on the pod the week before was that Aurora's going to win. There were 3 Auroras in top 8. finals, it's putting on Aurora against Zen. I was like, is this it? Will my prediction come true? Also putting, we've seen him in the finals before, just calling Phuket, right?
Yep.
He was in the finals. I believe it was the finals against Brody. So it was also kind of, would have been super cool to see him manage to take it down,
100%.
but Zen managed to get there, and Nick played it excellently. And with that, we have these MST heroes just skyrocketing in LL points.
I know, right? Like, it's not a surprise, right? We've spoken about this a couple of times over the last 6 weeks about, I guess, boiling it down to the power of MST. And I don't think the community or LSS are going to be sad that this is happening, right? That we're going to move into an era of at least reduced MST hero presence. Do you think at this point Nu is going to be the last to LL pretty easily?
I think so. I think she's the least overtly powerful of the three as well, just because of how targeted her matchups are. Like, her good matchups are, specifically the ones where there's really good blues on the other side. But when they don't have those, her matchups are actually not very good. Like the Aurora matchup, even though Aurora's running around all these no blocks and stuff, it's still a bad matchup for Nu, just because Aurora doesn't have all those blues that Nu really wants to prey on, right? Her strongest cards like Siren's Call, her hero ability, all revolve around the opponent's blues. And especially if the other MST heroes rotate, unless we see like Guardians come back in, I could see Nu's stock going quite a ways down. But Enigma and Zen, they are just innately powerful, and of course they use Traverse the Universe very, very well, which is one of the strongest pieces of equipment.
It's gonna be interesting to see how, if Nu gatekeeps Guardian a little bit as we head toward Mastery, middle of the year, I guess middle to back end of the year, what will happen there? Like, will it be a gatekeeper, or will it kind of be a case of it just becomes a meta dynamic, which will be really interesting of, if Guardian's popular, then Nu's playable. If it's more red line aggro, then Nu just isn't. Or is Nu just powerful because it's an MST hero, has these tools, others rotate out. There's positives and negatives to that, of course. And then you just have maybe Guardian as a share of the meta to prey on, but Nu is just so good that it's playable, and it just ends up gatekeeping Guardian. I'm really interested to see that, actually, but
And speaking of Guardian's blues, Jarl, like the most recent Guardian, does have a wide enough pool that he could put good blues for him that aren't very good for Nu. This is unlike Bravo, right? There was that anti-Nu Bravo list that was running around, just playing a whole bunch of like blue, like terrible blue Guardian auras. Effectively. So the Nu can't steal them and play them. Jarl could do something functionally the same, but without putting bad cards in the deck. Simply because of how deep his hero pool is. Maybe, gives Nu like an Autumn's Touch here and there or something. But could get away with not playing the big blue dumb Guardian attacks, or at least siding them out into Nu while still having a strong 60. So I'll be curious to see, people experimenting with that. And, if that's the case, then maybe, at least that Guardian isn't being gate kept, as you put it. So it'll be interesting to see how the meta develops. But we do need Enigma and Zen to sort of leave the meta for a little before we get there, I think.
We're going to talk a little bit about, we've had a chunk of preview cards come our way. We're gonna touch on those in a second, and we have a bit of a exciting piece to share as well. But I did just want to, lastly, you spoke about putting in that final, and obviously everyone knows just how strong a last 18, not even 18 months, basically since they've been competing in these tier 4 events, Blue Pitch have been present, right? Multiple top 16s all the way back to Worlds 2022, Worlds 23, 2 in the top 8, including Pudding Tam, right? Multiple calling top 8s now for Pudding. Just hasn't quite got that win. But, I go back to my point about who stands, at the top of, I guess, from me, the best players in the game. It is these players that consistently put up these results. Pudding is definitely now one of those players consistently putting up results. So, a shout out to Pudding. Just awesome to see.
Yeah, shout out to Blue Pitch as well. That whole team is just so incredibly consistent, and they're honestly just terrifying players to play against, right? You see like Alan Lau show up in your like matchup thing, or Xing or Pudding, and just like, oh no. And Nova won the Battle Hardened as well. Nova Chan of Team Blue Pitch won the Battle Hardened on that weekend. Yeah, so
on Zen, right? Because I know Zen won the Battle Hardened as well.
I don't remember the hero.
Okay, I'm pretty sure Zen. Pretty sure Zen won the Battle Hardened as well. Pretty sure it went 2 for 2. Yeah. So, the Hunted preview season is starting to kick off. We do have a preview card, Pankaj. We have one to share. We're not until January. We'll be sharing, I believe, January 17th. We'll be dropping that. It's I'm excited. I'm really excited to have a card to share with everyone. We're not in this first wave, but we have, I guess, some cards to dive into. So do you want to kick us off? And where are we heading first?
All right, so the first spoiler that was been spoiled like these past couple of weeks is Ranger Quiver. Yes, okay, so Enchanted Quiver. Ranger equipment, Quiver, instant, destroy this, prevent the next 1 arcane damage that will be dealt to you this turn. If there's a face-up arrow in your arsenal, instead prevent the next 2. So I think the fact that this is an instant is very, very interesting. Normally a Ranger isn't going to be ending their turn with a face-up arrow, but we have seen instant speed bow activations to put an arrow face-up in your arsenal, right? I mean, Voltaire was obviously one that comes to mind, and it's not legal anymore, but Barbed Castaway is an instant speed bow activation that's put an arrow face-up in your arsenal. So that tricksiness, I think, is going to be very, very interesting. And I wonder if it's a little bit telling about whether we're going to see more instant speed bows to come in the future.
It's really powerful, right? Like, think about, to get this equivalent effect right now in Ranger, you have to dedicate one of your equipment slots, like one of your 4 body equipment slots, right? And I think this is something that LSS really tried to do with the Quiver slot. It's a really interesting design piece, right, that Ranger gets access to. And the first chunk of quivers that we saw, they're all proactive, right? So, you've got things from adding aim counters to, putting a card to the bottom in Riptide's case, so you can, not brick yourself. That one's one of the worst. But, you've obviously got Abyssal and you've...
Remembrance.
Yeah, exactly.
Just remembrance on a stick, yeah.
Very powerful, but they're all very proactive, right? And they kind of align to giving Ranger this kind of proactive push, which, things like Codex have obviously done as well. And that's what kind of has brought Ranger out of, what it originally was, say, from Arcane Rising, Crucible of War, through to now, even when Lexi first released, through to, getting these sorts of cards. This is a very different twist, right? This is a reactive card. And I think placing a reactive effect in the slot is, first of all, I think a big kind of move on for LSS, but also represents a big power shift. And I think even if this card was even slightly weaker, I think it would still be playable in certain metas, in certain circumstances. And as it is, this prevent 1, or if there's a face-up arrow, prevent 2 text, I think that's very, very powerful. Think about trying to play Spell Void, leggings or something, and having to give up your leg slot or an access to also play Spellfray leggings against wizards, for instance. But even, it's like, oh, okay, none of the quivers are actually relevant in this matchup into, let's say, Runeblade. I can just play Enchanted Quiver and get 2 value out of it. Like, that is really, really strong.
Yeah, I think when quivers were first spoiled or first released, I believe that was in Outsiders.
Yeah.
I remember Brian Gottlieb did an interview, I forgot on which channel, he did an interview where he spoke about how that the topic of power creep came up, and he said the biggest form of power creep to date at that point was giving Rangers effectively an extra equipment zone. Which, yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, you're like, wait, that is, it just sounds nuts, right, in theory, but I think they've kept it at a very, very interesting space, both power level and design-wise, and I'm quite hyped to see this quiver, and quite hyped to see where they go with quivers. I mean, of course, it is Wizard hate after all, so I can only be so hyped for it. But it's a cool design space for sure.
Yeah, agree. Should we move on?
Yeah,
I think
the Katsu card.
Yeah, just so everyone knows as well, these cards that we're going through, the chunk that was released, in case you've been out of the loop, that we've had from content creators and from other community members this past week, has been all the expansion. What are they called? Expansion. I always
expansion slots.
Expansion slots. Sorry, expansion cards. What's what expansion slot cards? So the ones we go through here are not tied in with the set specifically, although this next one is a ninja action attack at Majestic. It attacks for 2, defends for 3. It is called Retrace the Past, and it is a Katsu specialization. It costs 0 as well. It is at blue, and it says combo. When this attacks, if a card with Gust Wave in its name was the last attack this combat chain, name a card, then this gets that name +2 and go again. So we've seen LSS for a while toy with this naming convention. What was the one from Outsiders that attacks for 3 and you pay 1 to make it a Surging Strike or a...
Oh, Be Like Water?
Be like,
but that's when it hits.
Yes, correct.
Be Like Water with a hit, yeah.
So now we're going down the road of, they've said... Okay, 2 things. They're going down this road of combo line of, giving I guess a less conditional because it doesn't have to hit, right? The condition is Gust Wave is the last card, but you're giving +2, you're giving Go Again, and you're naming a card so that you can then add any combo piece onto the end of this chain effectively, right, to trigger things. So super versatile, allows you to really play around with combo pieces. But my question to you is, do you think this is the card that James and Brian were like, we're going to give something to Katsu? Is this the card?
I think so. This seems really, really strong. So one real quick thing to point out about the naming thing is that I think they announced somewhere, there might have been a judge Discord or somewhere, that they're going to change the rules to allow naming banned cards. Because at least currently,
Yes.
like right now, as time is recording, you cannot name a card like Bonds of Ancestry.
That's hilarious.
But they said, with the spoiling of this card, that they will be changing the rules to allow that, which means the Dishonor line is back. But I think very, very importantly, you can just call the second last piece of these amazing, strong combo finishes that just haven't seen play because their second and third pieces were just so garbage. Like the Crane Dance line comes to mind, right? Fine Center is a very, very strong effect. It even has evasion baked into it, and it gives you a Zen state. But you have to play you have to put Crane Dance in your deck, and no one wants to do that. And with this card, you kind of just get to dodge that. And particularly when you think about like Dishonor and Fine Center being these blue 0-cost 3-block combo cards, which is something Katsu already wants to play. I see this as a very, very big upgrade. It also has some elements of the MST design, if I may, where it's a blue card that once you jump through enough hoops is a red card. And I think it's pretty cool that some other heroes are getting access to that as well.
I mean, we spoke last week about what makes things powerful. It's, inconsistent. It's resource bases, right? And when your resource base, as Katsu and Ninja at this point, continues to evolve and get these better and better blues, and these game impacting blues, these cards you can pitch for late and then set up these really strong turns. The more you get of them, the more, just consistency and power is baked into it because your blues are at that level. I think one thing that I wanted to point out just on I guess why I think this is maybe more of that late game kind of, it's going to have more impact as a threat density in the blue slot, is because you do have to, of course, play that card with Gust Wave in the name first, right? So you do, and to play a card with Gust Wave in the name first, you do have to probably have played a card before that. So, there is ways to get around that, right? Which we can talk about, but unless you're specifically setting those up.
Yeah, well, with the exception of Descendant Gust Wave, right? Which is, you
that's so weak.
Play that, but already has natural Go Again.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so it kind of depends where the strength of this. It was Descendant Gust Wave by itself was weak, but because Bonds of Ancestry was so strong, it was still like fine and people played it. This doesn't scream Bonds of Ancestry for sure, but there is a line where I suppose the rest of a hand lines up where like, this 1-4-3 Go Again is fine because of what I'm getting out of it otherwise. But
yeah, I guess it's just worth. I think a lot of times when cards get previewed, people look at like, oh, here's the upside of this card, right? The ceiling of this card, and the ceiling of this card is really high, right? And it has so much implication for what can be done on the combat chain link after this. But think about going backwards and that consistency piece we talked about, and what you have to do. The hoops you have to jump through. I think if you were trying to make this card work, you're like, okay, I'm going to build my deck, and this is going to be one of the focal points, is how I retrace the past and use the card. You're going to end up with a weak deck, I think, or a weaker deck than you would if you were to say, actually, this is a really powerful blue that I have some really great in-game ability to use, and also it's going to mean that I don't brick hands with multiple blues and actually have some upside into my cards when I draw, surging into a Gust Wave, and then I have this as my second blue sort of thing, right? Because at that point, it's just like you say, it just turns into red. It's just a Fluster Fist with Go Again at that point, right? Minimum, and also I could potentially go and find something out, all the upside up, but it is, I think that is what this card is. I think it is not the true high upside. It is not the Bonds of Ancestry, for instance. It is something very different.
I agree. It's not a build around whatsoever, but it just adds to consistency, as you're talking about, because of its floor. Like we spoke about the ceiling of this card being high, but also important to point out is that the floor is exactly what Katsu wants. 0-cost blue 3-block combo card. Just literally exactly what Katsu wants. You can like tutor for this, you can discard this, you can flick flag block with this, you can pitch it and your Kodachi's gonna go again. Like all that is already set. On top of that, it has this incredible ceiling. I think it's a solid upgrade, but yeah, I'm with you. This isn't the build around. Like Yeah, I'm not a Katsu gamer, so I can't say for sure, but I'm not sure I'd recommend putting like Break Tide and stuff in your deck
Yeah,
to try and play
exactly.
around this card. But something like Fine Center does make sense because that
Another
also
blue.
has the floor. Yeah, it's the other. This also has the floor that you're very very interested in.
Yeah.
Also, the sequencing on this card is actually kind of interesting, right? Because you can theoretically go ahead and find Fine Center like from your deck with Katsu, and then go ahead and like suppose a previous chain link hit, and then you hit this, and you can just call it. Is it Crane Dance before Fine Center? I don't know whichever the card is.
Yeah.
Before Fine Center, you can go and do that, but you can't. You need to have already have that set up when you choose the name for this card. I think that's interesting. Like, you can't rely on the Katsu on hit
Yes.
when you name this card. You can't be like, I'm going to name this something and hope that it hits so I can go find my thing with Katsu. Like, you need to have already done it or have it in your hand or something. Which I think is something to note for people who are going to play this card.
Yes. Right. Got you. Yep. I mean, you can take the gamble, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
But
or
like,
if you have the trick.
yeah. But it's obviously going to force your opponent to make it, which is not the end of the world. But then you would end up with a bad blue instead of, for instance, something like a Cluster Fist as the last attack. So I want to quickly add something, and we can do this for Enchanted Quiver as well. I'm going to call this the Arsenal Pass Impact Scale. And maybe we can use this as a little bit of a spoiler season where we think some of these Majestics and high-end power cards might land. And I guess this is what the conditions of the scale are. We'll do it out of 10, and the condition of the scale is the impact that you think this card is going to have on the deck or the hero, and how far it's going to bring that deck up, for instance. So if I used a card... let's talk about the Dash IO Armory deck, and we talked about a card like Cerebellum Processor. I would have, even in hindsight, I think even beforehand, I probably would have given that card, say, a 9.5 on the impact scale, because I think that was going to bring the hero from unplayable to very playable, if not tier 1, if that makes sense. So there's an example of a high-end card.
Right, I could see that. I guess my thing with these cards, both the Ranger Quiver and the Katsu card, is that I think they are solid upgrades.
Yep.
But I mean, if we're talking about like the current meta, no, I don't think you're playing Katsu over Zen at any point. In which case, the impact it's kind of effectively, ostensibly 0. Even though I do think it is a very very good upgrade. So how do we deal with that? I guess.
Well, I guess if it maybe moves up like a tier from, say, like, F tier to D tier or something, that that's probably a 1 or a 2 on the scale. I'll go first. I think I would give Retrace the Pass a 4 or a 5 on the impact scale. I think this card is very powerful, but I don't think that it's going to have impact on the meta, more so impact on just Katsu's sort of consistency and access to better blues. So actually, I'm going to go 4. I think this is like a 4 on the impact scale, our new impact scale that we're starting as of right now that I just came up with.
It wasn't even in the show notes. I was as blindsided as all of you. I'll go with I'm with the caveat that when Katsu becomes relevant again, I think this card will be a very, very important part of why he became relevant again. I'm going to give him somewhere... I'm give this card like a 5.5.
Okay, yep.
It's not quite as good as a 6, but I do think it's a little bit better than... I do think it's better than a 5. With that caveat, I don't think, again, no immediate impact. I don't expect him to show up unless there's some amazing ninja cards in the rest of Hunted. I don't expect him to show up until Zen LLs.
Might not be that far
when
away,
he
though.
does show up one day, when he does show up one day back again, I do think this card will be a big reason why.
Yeah.
So do we want to wind back and also talk about the Ranger Quiver and that impact?
100%. Yeah. Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go?
Yeah, sure, you can go.
Okay. I think this one is like a true... As much as I talk about the power level of it, I do think the card is powerful because of a design direction. I think overall, when you look at the card, its impact, given its kind of narrowness to arcane damage, and even if you look at the meta right now, I think it could have more impact in the future. But I think this one is lower for me. I think this one is like a 2 for me. I think this one is going to have really low impact, but it is a good card.
Yeah, I'm in a similar spot. I was actually going to say 2 as well, because of 2 reasons. One, it kind of relies on wizards being good. But I mean, you did mention, yeah, sure, you can stop an odd rune chant or something against Viscera or whatever. But I think just in general, that's like fine. That's like in the 2 level. And also, importantly, sort of the direction they're taking Wizard, at least where it seems like it, they're moving away from Wildfire, which I do think they should.
I was
That
going to
card
say
is
that.
kind of nuts. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they're moving away from that sort of exponential type of damage, the value of this card also goes down. So not only is this a card that's already reliant on arcane damage being present in the format, given that arcane damage, the impact of preventing that 1 extra point or 2 extra points is getting lower, based on at least what we've seen of recent Wizard design. Yeah, I'm with you. This is a lower impact card, but in those metas, you're still probably just going to dedicate a sideboard slot to it.
Yep. Cool. Where are we headed next?
All right, so next we've got the Verdance card. It's Ring of Roses. It's a legendary Verdant specialization. It costs 0, blocks 3, and is an Earth Wizard action aura. The first time you deal arcane damage each turn, gain 1 life. Which means that if your Verdant's hero ability is online, that life gain trigger will put an arcane damage trigger on the stack if it's your turn, because Verdance is scared that's your turn. So effectively, if Verdance is online and you're dealing arcane damage on your own turn, you kind of get +2 value, if you will. If you weren't already, you get +2 value, life gain, than the damage. If Verdance isn't online, you get a +1 life each time you deal arcane damage. That part is on either side of the turn, by the way. So when you deal arcane damage on their turn, you will still gain a life off of this card.
Yep. Wow. I mean, this card is clearly good, right? I mean, it's a legendary, and I think it's important to understand how that plays into the build around nature. Like if I compare this card to a card like Frost Hex, right? And in terms of the build around nature, the combo-esque nature, the kind of win condition nature of a card like Frost Hex, which at times was better than other times, right? Sometimes it was super impactful in the meta, depending on the matchups and even the way that the deck was built. I think eventually it became more of this kind of, matchup dependent thing, or this really good value play on turn 0, or a piece around, kind of the opportunity cost of the card. It was such a great punish as a like a free card to potentially play and then get incremental value out of it. If I compare it to that, right, which I think is a reasonable comparison people are going to make because of this Wizard aura. This is obviously legendary. This has, I guess the fact that it's a yellow versus a blue is definitely relevant as well, and also the fact that you don't get quite as much value off this until you are activated with your hero ability, I think is really relevant. I'm struggling a little bit with this card in terms of what it's going to do to Verdance. My first take is that it's not enough. Definitely it's not by itself. One legendary card is not enough, but it is a good card and it's going to have some impact. But the consistency is nil, really.
I love that you brought up Frost Hex because that's what I wish this card was.
It is not Frost Hex.
Yeah, it isn't. It's. I'm getting Spirit of Arena energy from this card. Like the card Spirit of Arena, except Bolton has a tutor and Verdance doesn't. So this kind of, in terms of what it does for the deck, it's not a build around. It's kind of just you've added more variance, right? Basically, but it's kind of inconsequential and high variance at the same time. Sure, the games where you find them super early, okay, cool, you're doing stronger things. But there's gonna be games where it's at the bottom of your deck and they're like really sad. You have no way to access it. And you spoke about Frost Hex being a game plan, and that's what I wish this card was. I wish this was a game plan I could work towards, rather than just a do I chance draw it in my first 3 hands against an aura. If not, I literally have no chance ever. So I was kind of hoping or wishing that this would have a cost on it. Obviously, if you take away the legendary tag, it needs to have a cost. You can't make the 0 cost. I wish the legendary tag was taken away and it had a cost on it.
Cost 1,
so it becomes like a Frost
2?
Hex. What? I mean, even 3. It's like a Frost Hex you play on yourself.
Yeah.
That's kind of like what I was like wishing for. Then I'd actually have a game plan to work towards. But so far, this isn't changing. It's not giving me a new game plan to work towards. It's not solving any problems. It's just it's just a Spirit of Arena that you put in my deck, which is a strong card for sure.
Yeah.
But you didn't give me a way to tutor it, so I'm kind of just like, okay, I hope I find this, but it doesn't change literally anything. By the way I play, this isn't something I could work towards feasibly, at least with the rest of the pool. Maybe this is indicative of something that's coming later on down the line. But for now, I don't think it moves the needle very much.
I'm not sure.
Also important to point out, there's a lot more incidental aura hate as well running around right now. Like Summer's Fall comes to mind. Like you're playing the mirror and there's like Summer's Fall. It's like it just feel like against a Florian. Rune Blades obviously. There's just enough incidental, just random stuff like destroys auras, where I'm just like, even that like sort of kills the card a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, Blast of Irvin. Okay. Sorry.
There's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah.
I think the other thing as well was that we've seen this happen. So if I go back to this legendary keyword, right, in terms of you can only have one copy in a deck, and you go back to something like Monarch, where we first saw that.
Chain one.
Yeah. The impact with a card like with that and Chain is like, well, the card's just really powerful, and it just is part of what you do. So if you draw it, great, you get a spike in power. If you banish it, you lose out a little bit of power. Then we've moved to cards that have more situational impact and are more like, oh, this is almost built around, but I can only play one card on my decks. You know, Spirit of Arena, Ring of Roses, for instance, even some of the Riptide, and even, you know, some of the, we saw it come into Ranger, right? I can't remember the Azalea name. There's one in Azalea.
Oh, Judiciary Executioner?
Judiciary Executioner, right. These have this effect that's pretty specific, or effect that you'd want it for a specific matchup or to do something, you know, to help you leverage something. And because you're going to play one of it, you can't guarantee as much. Although, again, you have a tutor to go and get it. So it's a little bit different. But I think it's obviously a play by LSS to, you know, increase the power level, but not increase the consistency of that power level. And I think it's a very, very fair thing to do. I just think when you look at something like Riptide, it hasn't really paid off, right, necessarily in a way that players might want it to. And I think that is kind of the expectation that players should have with a card like this. I do think because of just the way that this can play into how Verdance can play as a more value over the in-game kind of deck, that this will play out a little bit better than something like some of the Riptide pieces and the attack actions, because this is a permanent as well. But I do think it's really relevant to keep that that consideration in mind when it comes to this. So yeah.
And I did just think of another just incidental aura hate card like Scour. Like I think you probably just don't even play this card in the mirror, because
just keep stacking them up. There's so many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you brought up like Riptide and Azalea for these like legendary pieces, who both also have tutors. Riptide's latest card, the Rosetta, the plans for the worst or something, something along those lines. That card is insane. That card is really, really good, especially since you look at their hand and then you get to find the trap the exact trap that you want. You can go find the legendary ones as well, and he has ways to recur them as well, like Murky Water, right? So, and then Bolton got Spirit Arena, but he already had a tutor. Azalea got the legendary thing when she already had a tutor as well.
Yeah.
The other thing to point out is that aside from Spirit of Arena, the other of these legendaries that we've been talking about, like the Riptide Traps and the Arrow, and the Chain one as well, it's turn cycle specific. It gives you that spike of power on that turn that you played that legendary specialization, right?
Yeah.
The exception is Bolton's, because that's like that's like a almost game plan-esque, like just gives you a higher power level for the rest of the game, but he has a tutor for it. So this is like in that spot where it gives you a higher power level for the rest of the game, but there's no tutor for it, and it leaves a lot to be desired for me. But maybe it is indicative of something that's coming down the line.
I mean, I think the card is cool. I really like the design of this idea of here's a permanent that can have this, this value, but it is legendary. Like it is hard to access. It just probably isn't quite what Verdance players looking for.
It's very in theme.
100%.
You know me, I'm big on like flavor and everything.
Yeah.
So it is very in theme with the whole Earth hero shtick of getting stronger as the game goes on.
Yep.
Which is actually also why I wish this was more Frost Hex-esque, because I was like, it just plays right into my game plan, right? Like right into like the whole flavor of it, where I'm like, I'm setting up like my thing, I'm like rooting myself into the ground, and then after it slowly I'll like outvalue you through that.
Yeah.
So it's like there's like hopefully like unfortunately with just one copy it's not quite that, but I mean there's still flavor there, which I do appreciate.
Impact scale, score time. I'm going to give this something similar to Retrace. I'm going to give this a 5. I think this card is very powerful, and it's going to have impact because of the fact that, like you said, Earth games often go longer. Verdance wants to go longer. I think you're going to see this card in Verdance games a lot, and it's going to have impact. It's not at that ceiling that we're saying, something like a Frost Hex could be, where that might be more like a 7, 8, 9 on the impact scale. This isn't going to change the meta. It's not going to make Verdance all of a sudden playable. But Verdance is cool. I think the hero can be fun, and I think this is going to have impact to Verdance. So yeah, I'm going to give it a 5.
it's not at the ceiling of Frost X, but the thing is, it also isn't at the floor, which is like my problem
Correct.
with it, right? Like we were talking about Retrace the Past and everything, and how it has this additional ceiling while the floor is being incredibly high as well. But kind of along the lines of that, I'm giving this more like a 3.
Sure.
I'm in more that sort of camp because I don't think it solves the problems, right? In the matchups where it was going to go long, she didn't need this card to win. The healing pot combo will just kill the Florian, right? Like maybe not CYB Florian or something, but she has already a very, very strong end game combo. And this feels like it's more like aiding that sort of plan where it goes long enough for you to find it, long enough for you to extract value from this card as well. Big problems with something like Aurora that just kills you before you get to any sort of setup, and they just have better numbers than you the whole game, because by the time you're even turned on, you're almost dead. You're like sub 10 life.
Yeah.
And this doesn't this solves that if you can find it in the first 2 or 3 turns of the game, and the rest of the time it just did nothing. Which is why I'm more on the 3 scale. It's like the impact is limited to how early can you find this against aggro matchups, and it doesn't change her other matchups otherwise.
Cool. Next up, we've got Cull. This is a Shadow Runeblade action. It is at Majestic again. It defends for 3. It's at red, cost 0, and says you may play this from your Vanish Zone. If a hero has lost life this turn, you may play this as though it were an instant. And each hero banishes a card from their hand, and it has Blood Debt. I mean, this card's good. This card
is so good. I love this card. It checks all the boxes, right? Everything that Vince had won. She's wanted a shadow non-attack for a very, very long time, right? Like people putting like Envelop in Darkness and stuff. It's like there's like Besiege the Demagon, like kind of scraping up out of the barrel to find shadow non-attacks. And she's finally got this really, really strong one. It blocks 3. It can be played from Banish. That's another massive one as well. It's an Eloquence target as well. You can get rid of Funeral Moon tricks with this as well. Like the tricks you do with Funeral Moon, you can do with this as well, where you can play 2 of them and then they both get go again from Eloquence, whatever. It gives her a way to fill Banish without pausing a turn of sending damage, which I think is also very, very relevant. Because let's her put another Runegate card in Banish on the turn that she's already sent damage. And if she has action points, which is kind of the quest you have to go through, she can go play the Runegate as well. It's just, and then the sneaky play lines of playing it on the opponent's turn. Like if you put this in Arsenal, they CNC you take the damage and you respond to a trigger by making them Banish. I mean, they don't get to Arsenal or whatever, and you just put a Runegate card or something else you can play from Banish in your Banish zone, so you're not as affected by the fact that you have to Banish as well. I love this card.
Yep, this card is really powerful. I think you kind of nailed some of the biggest highlights there, but just to reiterate some of them, Banish. So you can banish a Runegate card, similar to when Chain would banish cards, you can get value from the card you banish. Of course, this card is probably equally, I don't know, and Chain has a lot more options, right, for non-attack actions now. But one of the pain points of both these heroes, Chain and Vincent, just Shadow Runeblades in general, has been non-attack actions that can be played from Banish, right? And LSS were really careful with that because it's really hard to balance those because of the fact you can then look at something like Seeds of Agony, for instance, right? Like how do they balance cards like that from a power level standpoint? And this card has a lot of powerful text on it, but one piece of powerful text that's missing, very importantly, is Go Again, right? To net those action points, and that is one of Vincent's pain points, like you said, is the action points. So I really like this card. I think it's powerful, but I think it fits within kind of keeping Vincent as what it is. And, it's not becoming something else entirely. It's just getting these upgrades and sort of little side grades. It's not getting necessarily an evolution to be something that it's not. So, yeah, I think this card is going to be good.
One other thing to point out is that it gives her a 1-card play, which also doesn't expend a rune chance. I think that is massive as well. Like, anyone who's put a time into Vincent knows that a lot of times you just, like, you kind of want to, like your hand is a little more blocky or whatever, and then your left is just 1 card and you can't do anything with it. You have to banish it and make your rune chant and then just like pass back. This, alongside Eloquent Eulogy, just came out a few sets ago, is just now another 1-card play that she has access to. So she can block down just 1 card, make the rune chant, and then she can send this. And this one doesn't expend her rune chant and gets a card from the opponent. You get to new mask them, basically, mask of recurring nightmares. Them, and they have to banish a card. And then now you also have, alongside Eloquent Eulogy, she now has more play lines where she can do something on 1 card without having rune chants around. And I think that is also just a very, very big upgrade when we talk about consistency.
Yeah. I'm gonna give this card on the impact scale. The problem is, I think people would have found this. There's a really interesting dichotomy with Vincent, I think, right? Where you play a couple of games against Vincent with someone who's played a lot of Vincent, and you're like, oh, this is so powerful. This has got so many upgrades. You're like, what the heck? And then you play it in internal testing, which I think a lot of top players did ahead of Worlds, or like at least a lot of groups played a decent chunk of it, and then realize that once you play more with it, and you know the play lines and the play patterns, like you just spoke about, whether your hand's blocky, how you can play off one card or not play off one card and two card, what that looks like, and kind of some of these tougher hands when things don't line up, how to play against Vincent, and how to look for the play patterns and the cards the cards you do or do not need to block. And that changed a little bit with the lace set, and obviously it got upgrades with Rosetta, but it still had some of those problems, and that's quite funny. And I think what's quite cool about Cull is that it doesn't play into that. It kind of helps you get around some of those things, some of those challenges. So I still don't think Vincent is going to be there as a top deck, but I do think Vincent is good, and until it gets respect, it's going to continue to do well in events where people aren't prepared for it. In terms of, I guess, like pure impact, I think I have this I think this is my highest so far. I'm going to give this a 6. I think this card is very powerful and is going to at least give Vincent a nice bump.
I'm at a 7 for this. I think with this, you should be practicing against Vincent, and you should be getting used to that play lines you're talking about. I think you need to start respecting it, because the other thing we actually didn't talk about, Vincent's greatest issue is fatigue. Right, against the decks that have blues, especially MST running around, they all have all these blues. And like something like New and Enigma, they block very well as well. Getting fatigued is one of the biggest problems, and I think this card also helps against that. You do have a quest to go through, you do need to make Eloquent somehow, give this go again somehow, but you do rip a blocking card from the opponent, and if you set it up correctly, you are not ripping a card from yourself, because it's putting a Rune Gate, writing a Banish, and going to play that. So it kind of solves that part of it as well. Also helps the aggro, like, unlike Ring of Roses, where I was like, this is kind of helping her long game plan, but she doesn't need help there, and doesn't help the aggro matchup very much. This kind of is helping all fronts. It's helping the aggro stuff, because you're like disrupting them a little more consistently. Like a lot of times you're like, I didn't find my widespread destruction or whatever, and you like disrupt them a little bit. You're helping on that front, and then you're also helping your fatigue stuff, the fatigue plan of it, because you rip blocking cards from them. I'm quite high on this card. I'm giving this a 7.
Cool. Let's rip through the last couple of cards. What's next?
All right, so next we have the Bolton card, Warcry of Bologna. Also, interesting to know that they did put a Bolton card in a set that has warriors in it, similar to the Katsu one, right? Mm-hmm. Which is like, there's a Katsu card, even though there's several Ninjas in it. So Warcry of Bologna is a 0-cost yellow light warrior attack reaction that blocks for 3. And says, target Raiden gets +2 attack this turn. Oh, no, it's this turn, not just this chain link. And it also has additional text. It has instant discard this. Banish X cards from your soul. The next time target weapon deals X or less damage to you this turn, deal that much damage to its controller, and that damage can't be prevented.
Yeah, interesting. Well, just one thing on that. You know, like you say, they printed Retrace the Past. They've got Warcry of Bologna. They do have kind of conditional, Retrace the Past is Katsu specialization. This is target Raiden, for instance. So they're not directly related to the set, right? And there are obviously this one's light,
and this is light warrior.
Yeah.
And the set is light warrior.
Yeah, I mean, card seems solid. The impact this has in Bolton, I struggle with Bolton because I think fundamentally the hero sucks. Like, the hero ability is just not good. But you give enough good upgrades, you give enough different angles of attack, you can outweigh that. The thing that Bolton, I think, needs is more ways to efficiently get cards in Soul, and that still remains the challenge, right? This again is another tax on your Soul, and I think that continues to be Bolton's challenges. How much can you tax your Soul for the right amount of value to win the game? Because if I'm sat there across from a Bolton, I'm playing as a Bolton, and they're using cards to load their Soul up, the least efficient their turn cycles are when they're doing that. I'm going to try and take advantage of those, and then I'm going to map out what they're able to do with their Soul. Okay, so you have 4 cards in Soul. I think I've probably, I've gained a decent chunk of value off that because you've had to get them in there in XYZ fashion. Now, what are you actually going to get in return for those 4 cards? And that's kind of the equation of, what if you lose 3 value on it or 2 value on a turn cycle to put a card in Soul, what are you getting back for it? And this is banish X cards, right? You prevent that damage, and then you deal that damage. So each card is worth 2, right?
Well, you're not preventing the damage that's being dealt to you. Actually, you're just dealing it back.
Oh, but
Yeah. So
this
the
guy's
weapons
way
that
worse than
are
I thought.
hitting you for 4, you vanish for. You will take 4, but you'll still deal 4 back.
Okay. Well, this card seems bad.
I think that instant part of it, I think it's honestly more Enigma tech.
Sure.
Because especially with the damage can't be prevented, and you can just blow up the whole board.
Yeah.
Hacking with it. I am quite high on this card.
Okay. At least one of us is.
Yeah. I think just gonna talk about Retrace the Past again, because this is similar vibes where the floor is exactly what Bolton wants. 3-block light card that's a yellow. Right? The floor is already at a high enough level where you're like always gonna consider this. And then when you think about the ceilings, I think it's right up there, right? The Raiden getting +2 for the turn means that now your Lumina turns, like the more Luminas you play, the more this kind of just like scales with that. And the floor being like a yellow +2 already, kind of already isn't the worst. I mean, you're typically just going to try and pair this Illumina if you can. But even like when you can't, it's still, suppose you're left at 5 cards for whatever reason, and you just need to play this for +2, whatever, it's still like fine. Or this can be your charge card, for example. And then that bottom text with the whole instant part of it, that's it's like giving Reckless Swing to a deck that didn't quite have it before. I mean, they always had Silver Shunt, right? But Bolton never played because it's like not a light card. But now they kind of have that version of it. So you always need to consider it right now, especially because of the floor of this card being so high that they're always going to have this in their deck now. And I think that just gives him a new angle, which is just strong. It's like a new angle that people just never had to think about before, right? Like if you're a deck that likes to swing a weapon and you're now at low life and doing that against a Bolton, it's just you can't just do that as freely anymore. I think there's a lot of equity there. And then there's the Enigma hate on top of the ceiling being high, the floor being high, and then there's the Enigma. This to me is like how hate cards like kind of should be done. I could go on a whole rant about how like previous illusionists hate cards are just they was kind of just pulling their punches and not giving us proper hate cards. But you look at like Hack to Reality and you look at Cleave, for example, like these cards are kind of this is an illusionist hate card that just never did anything. But this is the one where I'm like, look, you put it on like a really good floor of a card where the ceiling is good as well. It combos well with something Bolton already wants to do with Luminas and stuff. And it's got this like nice little hate thing, which also has counterplay from both sides. I'm a fan of this card, just design wise and everything.
Yeah, I'm not sold.
Fair enough.
I think one of my challenges with the upside in this card is a 0 cost 4, right, at yellow, because you get 2 attacks out of Lumina. Obviously, if you do multiple Luminas in a turn, it gets scaling +2. But at that point, usually in Bolton, with a Raiden build, do you want to be double? How are you setting up your Luminas is quite different to, for instance, a Saber build. But I do think that is good, and I understand that. At a +2, that floor is a lot different. The instant piece, honestly, as someone who's played a lot of Enigma and played a decent amount of Illusionist as well, unfortunately, I honestly just don't really care about a card like this, because if I know this card exists, I'm just going to play differently. I'm not going to allow them to get that value out of having a bunch of auras on the board, because I just don't necessarily need to plan. Like the onus is on the Illusionist player to play in a particular way that doesn't allow the value to necessarily be traded out of this. So I don't know.
So I'm curious about that. How do you? And that's my thing. I think there's value in Enigmas also needing to play around it, right? There's implicit value. So
sure, but Bolton isn't a good hero. So like, what? I don't think
okay.
that like.
Okay, that's fair. And I feel like once you bring the rest of the Bolton shell in, and then you're like, okay, like sure, yeah, I can't argue with that one. But this card though, like I think if we can separate like the rest of the shell from this card. Also, speaking on the soul topic, the Armory deck did give him in the equipment zones much better ways to fill the soul. Much like
it did.
less inefficient ways, if you will, to fill the soul. So, and I think Bolton just wasn't really super explored after that as well.
Yeah.
So I think the soul thing is to some extent has got a lot better since the Armory deck. But coming back to the Enigma thing, okay, how are you swinging a Mirror Guy into a Bolton now that this card exists? Like, I feel like what
I'm just I'll trade for it. That's fine. I'll trade for it. I'll swing it and I'll trade for it. Like, they have to use all their soul to do that. My deck is way more efficient than theirs. I have way more power in my deck as the Enigma. Like, this is my problem with a card like this, is that yes, it has a powerful effect, but the problem is your powerful effect is using a resource in a deck that's already resource constrained quite a reasonable amount, I would say, to be able to do powerful things. Like, in order to utilize your soul to to utilize your biggest output of damage, your Lumina turns, all these things, you need to utilize your soul to the fullest. And if you're having to spend time using your soul to trade, admittedly you are trading up on value into something like a Miragai, you're losing out on other value to deal the damage. So you're repositioning damage from your deck in a trading kind of way, cycle to cycle. You're trading it from offensive damage into damage that takes care of a challenge on the other side of the table. And I think we've time and time again seen when these effects or similar effects are there, that ultimately their impact is limited by how powerful the hero or the deck that's sitting across from the other side of the table is. I look at Brute with item destruction, right? Even when Dash was at its peak and this item destruction was at its most relevant, I'm talking about Smash
Smashing Performance?
No, the other one.
Arc Smash?
Yeah, Arc Smash.
Oh, the one where you roll a die?
Yeah. The Dash deck was just so much more powerful than the Reinhardt deck at the time that it just wasn't very relevant, to be honest. And I think this is the comparisons that I draw to it. Not to say the card isn't a good card in a vacuum. I think that's true. But when you expand it to the totality of what Bolton's doing, of what this adds to the deck, in my view, what Bolton needs is more efficient ways to load the soul or bigger payoffs for using that soul in an aggressive, proactive manner.
So I'm with you that I don't think this flips the Enigma matchup to be Bolton favored. But I will say that is on the back of exactly what you're talking about, where the rest of the deck is still not very good. And the hero kind of fundamentally has some issues that haven't been solved yet. But I do think this card itself is quite a strong card.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I think that there's also value in his other matchups, right? Where the fact that once you get low enough, now your Bolton opponent kind of has like a reckless swing in the deck, and now you have to think about that, and you can't just freely do the stuff that you always want to do.
I think that's the most.
I think there's also
yeah. Well, this is why we now have the Arsenal Pass impact scale, so we can use the Arsenal Pass impact scale. I'm going to give this a 3 on the impact scale.
I'm gonna give this a 5.
Okay.
I don't expect Bolton to be meta relevant next meta because of this card. Well, I mean, maybe the other warrior cards in the set do it for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, based on this card alone, I don't expect him to go become meta relevant. I'm sort of putting this card in a similar space as Retrace the Past, where I think it's strong enough that one day if he is meta relevant, like this is a 3 off in the deck. Like you're not. It's a good enough card that you're always putting 3 off in the deck, and it's gonna win you enough games. I'm just gonna put this in that sort of 5 impact scale.
All right. You're going to have to read the last card because I don't have it available to me. So do you want to hit us with this?
Yeah, last card is a Brute card, which is actually spoiled I think it might have been today, like shortly before we started recording. Called Thick Hide Hunter. It's a 2-cost yellow Brute action attack that attacks for 6 and blocks for 6. And it says, when this attacks or defends, discard a random card. So, Mr. Brute Aficionado himself, what are your thoughts on this card, your initial takes?
This is really similar to the card we just spoke about in terms of some of the constraints of this card. 6 power cards, so especially when it comes to the Brute archetype, are so carefully controlled by LSS for good reason, especially when they have relevance to Reinhardt, which this card does, right? Let's just say I play this and I attack with it and I discard an additional card. You know, it's now a 3-card intimidate attack for 6, right? That's a lot of the templating of what Brute is doing. So I think you're just so tied to the fact that they can't print things that are just too powerful, right? That are just going to have too much impact and give intimidate too much value, or free, almost like incidental intimidate, right? Powerful cards that just intimidate as well. That's what they have to be really careful of. But I think what you end up is with these cards that are just kind of, they're fine. they're going to see play sometimes. They might see play other, like Numbskull, for instance, right? These cards that are like, they're kind of like cool situational or tech cards for particular builds or matchups. And I think that's what this card will become. You know, some of the best value you're going to get out of this is a 1-card 6 where you don't have to discard a card because you've used the rest of your hand to block. But that's so specific. The good thing is that it is a 2-cost. It does defend for 3. It does have 6 power. It is a yellow. If this was a blue, on the other hand, you're talking a very different situation where you've just given a great resource bump to Brute, which LSS have, multiple the developers, Jason Chung, Brian Gottlieb, James White, over the years have spoken about blue 6s for Brute are going to be so carefully controlled if printed at all with no restriction, right? So you're going to see these cards at yellow. The problem is yellow slot in Brute now is just so packed. And I think this card is not really going to cut the mustard for most of the current Brutes and is ultimately going to just be a bit of a, Brute got a new card that might be interesting, but it's not changing anything.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the yellow slot for Brute is already so packed, because, I'm with you. I'm not sure if this is good enough to push out any of the other really powerful yellows that they already have, right? Like, I mean, are you really going to play this over like a yellow Wild Ride in like KO or something, for example? And Reiner, okay, to be honest, I haven't looked at a Reiner deck in a long time. Maybe there's some terrible yellow that takes over. Maybe, but yeah, it's still, this is like a bit like Brute's version of like 10 foot tall and bulletproof, almost like a Brute theme. 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and it's like, it's okay. The best case for this card is, like you said, you block with the other 3 cards, and this is the last card you block with, and then it blocks 6, and that's like, cool, you don't need to discard anything. Offensively, your best case is you attack with this and you have no cards in hand, so you don't need to discard, but then you went vanilla 2 for 6, and I feel like you probably have better things to be doing than that. So I'm with you. Not super high on this for impact skill. I'm kind of, I want to give this. It's like a 2. I gave it 2. Oh, I gave it 2 to Ranger Quiver. Right. This is weird. Is this a 1? Because I'm like, I think the Ranger Quiver is going to have more impact than this. So it's like, is this? Giving it a 1 feels almost. I don't know.
I'll snap it off.
It's a 1.
I'm giving it a 1. Yeah. 1.
Yeah.
I hope I'm wrong, but I'm giving this a 1.
Yeah.
I want to be wrong about Brute cards, but it's a 1. This is. We've actually spoken for a long time about this, but I think these cards are just so interesting, and I think the Hunted, we've I wouldn't say we criticized, but we spoke about maybe the lack of impact on some of the expansion cards slots the last 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I think some of these cards are, they're Carl, for instance, Retrace the Past, Ring of Roses, even I will admit Warcry of Balina, I think have some really interesting impact to their respective heroes, and that is going to be interesting. So I'm glad we spoke about these. There's more to come. I think we're going to skip the Commander Cookout for today, because I want to make sure we get to a little bit of a chat about Living Legend, because we've put a little bit of work in. We've spent some time. We want to chat at least about predicted metagame for this weekend and what we're expecting to see. If you're going to tune in, listen to Pankaj's silky smooth voice alongside Sam. Sam going to be there? Who else is casting?
Sam and Brian.
Sam and Brian. So great team.
Yep.
But just quickly, if you do want to get your questions in for Commander Cookout, we have a few of a bit of a backlog now, but you can email arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below. Let us know it is a Commander Cookout question, or if you're an Arsenal Pass patron, you can drop it in the Discord. We do actually, just quickly, we have a bit of a giveaway for the Scarf for a Scarfs and the playmat from last week. We're going to give away 3 sets of the Scarf for a Scarf, including the playmat to a lucky winner. And this is all you have to do to enter the giveaway. First of all, be following us over here on YouTube, and you can drop a comment below in the YouTube comments letting us know, what do you think our preview card is? We've got a preview card. I want best guesses. We're interested to see what you think our preview card might be.
It's obviously just Reiner again.
Yeah.
Reiner Reckless Rampage. Let's go.
hey. If they're going to give a bunch of upgrades to Reiner while printing Reiner, I'm here for it. So check that out. Yeah. But otherwise, should we head to, I guess, now main topic, which is almost a subtopic, but I really want to make sure we spend some time with Living Legend. So where do we go? Where do we start when it comes to looking at Living Legend in this current iteration? Given, there's been some changes, there's been a ban restricted announcement recently. We're heading towards this this calling. We had a battle hardened a few weeks ago, and skirmish season, of course. Where do we sit right now?
So I think we're gonna start by looking at skirmish season results. The past 2 weeks, we've had Living Legend skirmishes happening everywhere. So week one, the results were kind of what you expect. I don't think something very, very surprising came out of the week 1 results. We had Starvo at the top with 9 wins. Zen at 8 wins, and then Viscerai at 5 wins, and a whole bunch of 3s and 2s and so on later on down the line. Week 2 is when things start to get really, really spicy. We have Viscerai at the top, which is okay, 8 wins. Second place, week 2 of skirmish wins, Dromai, sitting at 7 wins, coming out of nowhere. I think she got 1 win in week 1, and then week 2, she's at second on the leaderboard. Well, sharing the second place with Starvo, also at 7 wins each. Dromai is, I think, been a little bit of a breakout this past week.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to should we just hit a couple of these decks and the reasons they're seeing results, not seeing results, and then should we go to kind of what our expected metagame is for this calling? Is that a good way to do it?
Yeah, that sounds good. And we can talk about the upgrades they've gotten recently as well. Because, I mean, Living Legends is all about, it's about the old banned heroes, but those heroes have been getting extra cards, right? Star was a fantastic example about it. So yeah, we can get into that as well.
Yeah, first thing I do want to kind of add as we go through this, just a bit of, I guess, a framing device. Week 1 to week 2 skirmish, what I find quite interesting, yes, of course, Dromai, but it's actually Zen dropping off in win rate from being the second winningest hero to half the wins. Because the other heroes are pretty consistent, right? Bravo, Viserai, they're pretty consistent. Dromai obviously comes up out of nowhere, and Zen kind of drops off, and I think that is a bit of an interesting story. And yeah, a couple of heroes that we can touch on that you might have expected to see not getting maybe the win. So should we start with Dromai? Because it is the most interesting, right? Why is Dromai seeing play? Why is it the second winningest hero in week 2 of skirmish season?
My initial theory was that maybe it's the answer to the CYBs that have been running around. CYB Oldhim is like a deck in LL, and I think there were a fair number of Starvos that were also just trying CYB Starvo, because honestly the strength of CYB and Oldhim, a big part of it was just the equipment, like, alongside the Crown of Seeds and the Stalagmite and stuff, which Starvo also has access to. So I know a bunch of Starvos are trying that as well. But I think as I thought about it more, you realize that the two most prominent Guardians, like Starvo and Oldhim, don't have a lot of poppers. And then the other relevant decks, you talk about Zen and Viserai and all these, also aren't running a lot of poppers. In general, there's very, very few things to trigger Phantasm in this format. And I wonder if that's maybe what had Dromai rise to the top. But at the same time, when the Zens and Viserai is running as high as they are, I'm drawing a little bit of a blank. Do you have any theories?
Yeah, I think a big part is, okay, how do you attack Starvo being potentially the best deck in the format, right? Which I think was what everyone came into the season thinking. Starvo seems like it's the best deck, especially post the bans to Kano and Zen got restricted, right? So
the bonds.
Yeah,
so bonds.
Starvo seems like the most powerful deck coming in there, and it gets the upgraded ice card from Jarl as well, which I think is a very powerful card. So I think
as well, actually.
What's that?
Starvo's equipment got a big upgrade from the Jarl deck as well.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I think Starvo in a very, very strong spot. I think if you look at the answer to that, honestly, it's not Prism, right? Because if they just do the Starvo thing, they get to just mow you down, and the way you have to win that is line up good ALS turns. They have enough poppers that you can't really herald them. You can't extract value that way. You can't extract angel value. There's enough there. Whereas you look at something like Dromai, if you can assert a board using a couple of Ash into a couple of Dragons, they have to turn their attention to them. They can't just do what they do against Prism, where they just go, well, I'll just mow you down and kind of ignore anything except the most important aura, and I'll pop the couple of heroes that you can play. That is just not the same. And especially when you use things like Maraga and Chroma, you can strategically attack, and they just don't have enough poppers to be able to, like, you don't actually have to be dealing them damage. You just set up this board and you find a turning point against them, and that's enough. Like you might have seen with previous Dromai builds, except that the deck on the other side, the Guardian on the other side, doesn't have 36 plus poppers. They have more like 20, 24. So it's as much as maybe 30 if they've set up. So it's a very different proposition, I think, and I think that is genuinely why we're seeing Dromai take out all these wins and probably see a lot of play heading towards Chicago.
The other thing why Prism maybe isn't quite the answer. I mean, I was one of those people that believed that even back in the day, Starvo was favored into Prism. Like full Casino Starvo was favored into Prism. But now they also have Lightning Greaves, which has made Prism's game plan to Starvo like even worse, right?
Very true.
And they are running instants like the Somersaults and stuff. The Dromai thing, like, to some extent, it feels like I'm using, I'm coming up with a theory to fit the data. But if you gave me the theory beforehand, I would have been like, I'm not sure I agree. Which is where I'm struggling with trying to think about Dromai's, like, why she's performing. Like you tell me these things, Starvo doesn't have enough poppers and stuff. He needs to pay attention to dragons and stuff. It's still, if you told me that before I saw the data, I wouldn't have been convinced. And that's the sort of like mental thing I'm being very aware of right now.
Of course.
This feels like a sort of a hindsight explanation, but something about it still doesn't feel like it's adding up. Like, because, sure, he doesn't have a lot of poppers, but he does have ice. And Dromai is quite vulnerable to ice as well. Like, blizzards and stuff and stalagmites and
Yep.
resolving a child like frigid, icy hammer. All these things can be quite annoying for Dromai. And when he does a Starbow thing at your face and then kill a dragon, that's still something that seems really, really powerful. He obviously still has lightning greaves if you put too many passing mirages down or whatever. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I wonder, maybe there's a fair bit of just Dromai as with Illusionist is just you need enough reps into it before you're able to come up with a good prioritization on where you're supposed to send the attack to face or which dragon to kill and everything. I wonder if there's some aspect of that going on as well.
Yeah. No, I don't think the matchup is phenomenal. Like, I don't think it's like, oh, this is such a good matchup for Dromai. I think this is a response. I think it is a reasonable one. I don't think that the matchup is particularly amazing, but I do think probably just at a base level it is, and the way Dromais are trying to target them, I think it probably is favored. But equally, I think Starbow is so powerful that it can adapt back, and I think that is going to be the challenge. People are going to be prepared for Dromai come this weekend.
Unless, I mean, so you're talking about Starbow is powerful enough to just get over that, unless there were a lot more CYB Starbows. That is the one that through line, that thread of logic is one that I feel like I can accept the most, was that a lot of them want CYB and Dromais could prey on that a lot more easily than like the non-CYB versions. And if we expect to see... Sorry?
I don't get it. I don't get CYB and Starbow. I don't understand it.
Yeah, but I could see if it starts shifting back towards like regular casino Starbow, I could see Dromais not having as good a time. I do agree with you; they're probably slightly favored, but not that good that they can be at 7 wins when the other decks are Viscerai and Zen, which is just terrible matchups for Dromais. So the thread of logic that I'm following is that there's potentially more CYBs running around this past week, and Dromai was like, "Hey, y'all can't do that," and then we'll see. I don't expect too much CYB in Chicago.
Yeah. I mean, we'll kind of wrap everything up at the end with like what our like top decks are and the meta expectations. So I'm just happy to just kind of hit a few decks that I think are interesting. Chain, really low win count this skirmish season, and honestly has kind of had mixed results over the Living Legend life. It's had a couple of like really strong performances in chunks. Think back to LA, for instance, at the Battle Hardened at the Pro Tour, and then at other times it's just not shown up at all, and including the skirmish season where it's had, I think, combined 4 wins. What are your thoughts?
Something that's come to mind when I think about my perspective on Chain is something Nathan Crawford says a lot. He hangs out a lot with Josh Lau, right? And he says that if anytime in a meta, if Josh Lau comes to him and says Warrior is bad, don't play it, he just instantly accepts it and be like, yep, there's no point. Because there's other metas where Warrior is just kind of mid or whatever, but then the diehard Warrior fans be like, oh, we gotta play Warrior, it's kind of good right now. And that's how I feel about Chain. Even the diehard Chain players are saying don't play Chain. So I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, like why would you play this guy then? When the people who loved this deck back in the day and they lived and breathed this deck and they finally get to play him again in LL with, they still have Belittle back and everything. Even they think he's not the place to be. I take their word for it and be like, yep, I'm not too convinced on this hero.
Yeah, it's just so odd to have a hero that it was in its time was just so dominant. But I think it's just a testament to where, because you look and go, oh, so Viscerai is the correct Rune Blade, but that feels weird. It's not the most powerful Rune Blade. Arguably, it's one of, I guess about outside of Skelata, one of the least powerful Rune. I mean, it's still in classic constructed. Like, how can this be? It's not Briar, it's not Chain, but actually, ultimately, with the way that the game has developed and moved along over the years, it's just the decks that can do something similar to Chain just do it more efficiently, like Zen, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, you speak about heroes in their prime. Isn't it wild to think that a stronger version of Zen was legal in CC just a few months ago?
Yeah, I know.
Zen in LL is weaker than what he was in CC in Amsterdam, right? Actually, no, maybe not Amsterdam because Bonds was banned a little bit before, but like just before that.
Yeah.
Because in LL he only has 1 Bonds of Ancestry.
National season.
National season. Like that version of Zen was stronger than what he is in LL, which is really, really interesting. And yeah, so now we come back to Zen. I'm just like, to me, and maybe spoiling a bit of our ending a little bit here, I'm not sure why you play anything other than Zen or Starbow. I'm just in terms of matchup spreads and everything.
Yeah,
we speak about Dromai maybe coming and being up Starbow and everything. Zen just is fine to Dromai. Zen's Starbow matchup, like the Zen Starbow matchup, is quite even, right? So it's not like in between them. There's a very strong reason to like the tiebreaker doesn't exist like in their matchup. And then just yeah, they're just both so fundamentally incredibly strong, and I'm not sure why you'd play something other than them.
I guess we saw this at Worlds. Ultim CYB, like is that a reason? Like, can you have a good Zen and Starvo matchup, and then Drome as the answer to, like you said, these CYB decks, and Starvo to build a Starvo that can beat Starvo and Zen? Do you have to play CYB? Like, is that the answer? Like, I don't know.
I feel like a CYB less Starvo could probably beat Oldham. Beat CYB Oldham, maybe? Right? As in, I think, oh yeah, actually, the Runaways, actually, they did a podcast a couple of weeks ago talking about this. But like, if anyone LL wants to beat CYB, you just put a few drones of brutality in your deck, and you always beat CYB.
Yeah, sure.
Like, you put 3 of them, 2 of them block the hammer, and then the other one sends face, and you just always recurs. I thought it was a very, very strong point. So, like you know, these skirmish seasons, the other thing about LL is that we just don't have a lot of information on them, right? We don't have a lot of information on the decks and the game plans and stuff. So the skirmish season results is also hard to like look into it too much.
Yeah.
Whereas for something like the calling, it's like people will be way more prepped, and you know, if they find these game plans for CYB, like the drones of brutality kind of thing, then it's just like, yeah, there's a much easier answer to CYB rather than playing CYB yourself.
Yeah. Is there any other decks you want to talk about before we kind of, I guess, give our position on the meta, the decks to play, the decks to beat, and what we think is going to show up and do well in Chicago?
Yeah, so Kano has kind of completely dropped off.
Yes.
But we still expect some of them at Chicago. Kind of like the diehard Chain fans who, even though they're saying you shouldn't play Chain, they'll show up on Chain. I expect Kano to be in a similar spot. I think losing like 8 out of 9 of those open the floodgates kind of did hurt him quite a bit, especially since the others are getting upgrades. Like the others are getting upgrades. But I mean, Kano's still Kano, and I could see in the hands of an extremely skilled pilot, like the types of like Alexander Vora and Peter Budensik, I could still see him like topping and maybe even winning. Like Kano's just that sort of hero, right?
Yeah. Yep. Don't disagree. Anything?
Oh, yes. There's one more.
Yeah, you have
There's
one
this
more.
OTK Florin. There's an OTK Florin Scepter list that I've been hearing rumblings about. I haven't seen it play. I think I've like spectated one Tarsha game where I saw it being played. And I was like, what is this? That's they just had to shout that out because I think there's not going to be some people going to bring it. I don't know. It's like I think it does run CYBs, and it kind of just I think that beats up Starvo. I'm pretty sure that list actually just straight up beats up Starvo.
I'm excited to see something random pop up as a counter or as like a meta pick. I'm down for it. I kind of thought maybe that might be Briar, to be honest, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. Briar's done all right. Briar is, outside of the decks you've spoken about, it's the most winningest deck out of those 4. It had 3 wins in the first week. Yeah, I think Aurora had 3 in week 1 and then dropped off the list in week 2. Like 1 win, I think, in skirmish season. Whereas Briar had a good, like a solid week 1 and week 2. 7 wins total across the 2 weeks. So Briar is interesting. I think it just comes down to the fact I just don't think it's quite. It's just, you know, I think it just plays in. To be honest, like, you need a reason to play it. Yeah. One thing is
Aurora. I feel like. Sorry, go on.
No, you go.
The Aurora Ball Lightning Arc Lightning thing is kind of nuts.
Yeah.
So, which is why I was expecting Aurora to maybe have a little bit more wins than Briar, but CMH is also nuts. So.
Well, that's what I was going to say, right? Is like that is an interesting reason to play the deck. Whereas I think, you know, when we've seen aggro decks, we've spoken about this before in Classic Constructed, often there's not a reason to play a different aggro deck than just the fastest aggro deck, right? Or the most explosive or the most damage dealing aggro deck. And CC's changed a little bit, I think, where there is reasons now because of the dynamicism between what these decks do. I think in Living Legend it just isn't necessarily the case right now. I mean, I haven't played a whole lot, but from what I have played, that is the feeling I get. So I guess with that said, what do you expect to be the most played deck? What do you expect to maybe be, you know, the top 3 decks, and what's going to do well?
Most played, I think Starvo, followed by Zen. Third most played, I guess I'll give it to Viscerai. But I mean, when we speak about Zen being so high up, I don't know why you'd want to bring Viscerai is the thing. Like Zen has a decent Viscerai matchup, as in CC, same thing in LL, which actually is another reason why the week 2 skirmish season results are very confusing. Viscerai being most winning, but Zen dropped off, as you pointed out, from week 1 to week 2, which is quite confusing. But yeah, I think third most played, probably Viscerai, and I expect the two decks to perform the best. In terms of conversion to top 8, I expect that to be Starvo and Zen.
Yeah, I actually just mirror that, except that I do think that Viserai is not as bad. So this is what I compare it to, right? Viserai Zen previously, but Zen having, full access to bonds, or even if you Zen from, let's say, like current Zen, right? That matchup is like pretty good for Zen, but it comes down to, the fact that you get to create these Zen state tokens, whether it's just the one time or it's multiple times depending on the build you're playing. I think when you have access to Scalata and you do get to do something pretty insane, and Zen is down to like the one bonds, I think the matchups are more swingy, and I think that is a reason that matchup is not as terrible as it was in CC, or even honestly, I think it might even be better for Viserai than it is in current CC. So I think we will see Viserai as top 3 played, and I actually expect that we might see one in the top 8. I think it will be dominated by Starvo Zen. I think what we're going to see is like 6 of the top 8 be Starvo Zen Viserai, and then 2 kind of like counterplay decks like a Dromai or a CYB Ultim or a Kano or even an OTK Florian Scepterlist.
I think one Kano in top 8. I think that's going to happen.
I'll take the under. But
Kano do that. Yeah, you'll take the under now.
I'll take the under. We'll see though. We'll see.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm excited to catch a bit of the coverage. See you on the desk. Hear you on commentary. See what happens this weekend. I think this is one of those ones where, like, honestly, something really interesting and spicy could happen, because I think certain people are probably the variance between the amounts people are testing for this event and the amount people are covering this versus something like a Classic Constructed or a Limited or something is just so different right now. So I think things could happen. This is our first Living Legend calling. I think that's very exciting, and this is the one kind of event to me that stands out as like, yeah, something could happen unexpected because of the nature of all the things that I just said, plus the card pool size. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think we could be in for quite a treat, to be honest. I mean, we didn't even talk about, like, I don't know, Berserk Rhino or something. Maybe it's coming and is like wrecking everything or something, right? There's just so many options, and yeah, as you said, not enough people talking about it because it's just not really been a super relevant format that everyone's gonna like prepare for. So yeah, I'd be so down if some hidden gem suddenly shows up and just takes on the entire event.
I'm down for it. Well, that has been episode 191 of Arsenal Pass. We've hit some hunted previews. We've hit skirmish / calling season of Living Legend. And I want to shout out to Arsenal Pass patrons. If you want to get involved and get us kind of cookout question, please do so. And if you want to get in that giveaway, please also do so. Drop a comment down in the YouTube comments below. Let us know, what do you think our preview card's going to be? Is it a particular flavor of preview card? Maybe it's a class you're thinking. Let us know. Until next time, we'll see you in the next episode.